Hola
Okay,
gente,
we are.
hola gente del grupo Grite, ¿cómo están? Estamos nuevamente en otro encuentro con otro gran invitado, nada más ni nada menos que David Morrell. Eh, Presentarlo es casi algo ingenuo, no solamente lo van a conocer por su novela First Blood, que está detrás de él en estos momentos, sino que además es un escritor de literatura de terror. Una de sus primeras novelas es la fantástica The Totem, y a lo largo de su carrera ha hecho algunos de los thrillers más emocionantes, implacables, divertidos que hemos podido leer. Afortunadamente acá en Argentina hemos tenido muchos de sus novelas traducidas al castellano. Así que, welcome David Morrell.
um, Mr. Moore, David, we are very uh, pleased and honored of having you in these new interviews of the Grupo Grite. Fernando make an introduction about your main moments in your writing career. Of course, mentioning First Blood, where appeared the infamous John Rambo, but not only that, but all your work as genre writer, besides that, as a comic script writer. So we will far away, and this is our first question. We know you are right now. You are a professor, member of the faculty of the Iowa University. Am I right?
I was a professor in American literature at the
Yes.
University of Iowa. There are a couple of universities in Iowa, and this one was the University of Iowa. And I taught there, I was a full professor, and I taught there for 16 years. And eventually I decided that balancing the writing and the teaching I was getting up at waking at 5 o'clock in the morning and writing, and then I was teaching, and it got to be complicated. I love teaching, but
Yeah.
finally I said the writing was more what I needed to do.
Yes. This university of yours where have the worldwide famous residence for writers, the Iowa
There is a
program.
there are two programs there. One is, and this is pertinent to our discussion, one is the International Writers Workshop.
Yes.
It's not part of that. And then there's the Writers Workshop, which is mostly in English, but I was not part of that either. I can teach writing, but I was teaching American literature. Ernest Hemingway, John Steinbeck, William Faulkner, Edith Wharton, the classics.
All
Uh,
right.
and later, I have at various places, mostly at conferences, taught writing, but I did not teach writing there.
All right. So, in this subject, could you discuss how your academic background in American literature has influenced your approach to crafting narrative of war and conflict?
Well, let's start with the craft part. Because of my training, I have a doctorate, a PhD in American literature, so I know how to take books apart and reassemble them, how to analyze them. And that is not always a skill that authors have. I'm not saying this is good or bad. It's just a way of doing it. I remember in the United States and in Canada there was a jazz pianist named Oscar Peterson, and I don't know if that's a name that's familiar, but he was at one time very famous, and I was fascinated by him because he started his career in music as a concert pianist. He played Beethoven and Brahms and Chopin and things like that. And then he said, I'm going to be a jazz pianist. So he took all that training he had, and then he knew what he was doing when he was varying the music when he was performing the free form that jazz is. So with me, I compare myself to that. I have a formal training in writing and putting books together. So when I write, I have a very certain knowledge of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Every scene, I understand what I want to achieve. Some writers, and this is not good or bad, it's just different. Some writers are intuitive and they go into a scene and to see what will happen, but I usually know where I'm going and what I want to accomplish.
Yes, great answer. Yes, yes, yes. It's much more my own approach.
Mhm.
I'm even though I'm a lawyer, I was going down little by little to the writer and studying an FMA at the Salamanca University. So I got the both sides of, chopping apart a book
Yes.
because part of my law school lawyer business, and the other side is like just somebody who enjoy literature. So I try to mix those things. Let's go with the next question. In First Blood, the character John Rambo has become iconic in popular culture. How did you develop his character, and what themes did you intend to explore through his experiences?
I was born and raised in Canada.
Yes.
I currently have dual citizenship. I'm a Canadian citizen and an American citizen, although I haven't lived in Canada for a very long time. And I came to study at Pennsylvania State University to get my doctorate. And I came there in 1966. Now, that was as the Vietnam War was,
Absolutely.
was getting bigger. But in Canada, no one had talked about the Vietnam War. But I came to the United States and all I heard was Vietnam, Vietnam. And as a student, my fellow students were afraid of being conscripted into the military. And I was married. I had a child. I was Canadian. There was no way I was going to be in the military. But as a consequence, I had a distance that I was watching events in the United States, and the university, Pennsylvania State University, to help me pay for my tuition, hired me to teach writing. And I don't know how this happened. I'm very grateful. I was very young, and I'm like 23 years old, and I was teaching students who had just come back from Vietnam.
Oh my
And
gosh.
they were looking at me, we're the same age, and they're saying, "Why weren't you in the war?" So I explained to them about my background as a Canadian, and then I asked them to talk to me about what it was like for them to come back from the war. And I don't know if the expression post-traumatic stress disorder is familiar in
Yeah,
other.
yes,
Okay.
indeed, indeed.
Well, nobody at the time used that expression.
No.
They they refer to shell shock or battle fatigue or something like that. But what they told me about nightmares, drinking too much, some were using drugs, um, difficulty relating to people, jumping when there was loud noises, when there were loud noises. And these were all symptoms of what we recognize now as post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, this was a new thing for me. So they told me about this. And a thought had been going through my mind about, as I'm watching the news on television, they would have a report about a fight in Vietnam, a battle, and then they would have a report about the riots that were going on in American cities at that time. And I said to myself, it's like the war, the Vietnam War had come home.
Yes.
And then I said, what if I were one of the young men I was teaching who had these nightmares? What if one of them had come back, and how would he react to peacetime? How would he react to the country which was torn apart in the same way that, in a way, the war was in Vietnam? So that was the origin of First Blood. And then I began wondering who that man would be and what his background would be and whom he would meet to be in conflict with. But those conversations I had with my students were a big help.
Okay, it's great. Is the real deal of the craft
Yes.
crafting the story. Thank you very much, indeed. Our next question is: your novels often delve into themes of psychological tension and human resilience. How do you approach the portrayal of trauma at its impact on characters of your stories?
My father died in combat.
Oh,
I'm
I'm so
old.
sorry.
I'm old enough to be a child of World War II. And my father died at D-Day during the invasion of Europe against Germany.
Yes,
And so I grew up without in my formative years, I did not have a father. Now, my mother later remarried, but my stepfather, he and I did not relate to each other. It was not good. And for a time, my mother had been forced to put me in an orphanage. So I was alone. I'm an only child. I was in an orphanage. I was alone. My view of life from when I was young is that lots of bad things can happen to you. So, and in my personality, but also in my characters, they tend to be people who are very careful. They tend to be people who are well trained and who use their training to discipline themselves against the hardships that life can give them. My books often distinguish between people who are professional and people who are amateurs. And
indeed.
trying to be a professional, not just in your business, but in the way you run your life.
Yes, indeed.
I don't know in your experience, but in mine, I often encounter people who are very, to use, I don't know if this translates well, sloppy. They're not controlled. They're not
Yes,
disciplined. They don't pay attention, and they have a lot of bad things happen to them, largely because of carelessness. And my characters are all professionals. They pay attention to the things around them, and the basic theme behind it all is that bad things can happen when you least expect them. So what will you do about it, or how can you try to guard against it? And so those are basically the characters I write about.
for the sake of the understanding of our audience, slappy in Spanish could be translated at like descuidado or
Yes.
without uh, self-containment and this kind of things. Okay, thank you very much. Um, let's talk about the Brotherhood of the Rose, your really celebrated novel for its complex plot and intense suspense. What inspired you to write this particular novel, and how did you develop its intricate storyline?
Are you familiar with John le Carré, the English spy?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Great talent. Well, he had not been very famous in the United States until the early 1980s when his novel Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy was adapted into a television miniseries. And I watched that with great respect and interest because, and I looked into John le Carré, it was his pen name. In real life, he had been an espionage agent. And he was writing that novel and others with the true way that espionage spies people behave. And I was thinking how different that is from the way, and that's like the English, in England tradition. In the United States, until that time, when people wrote about spies, it was usually not very authentic. There was a lot of action and a lot of shooting and chases, but the way the spies gained their information, the way they behaved, wasn't accurate at all. And I thought that it would be interesting to try to marry the two things, to have a novel which had what I'm known for at that time, action, and to marry that with the real spy techniques that were in Le Carré. So I was trying to bring two things together that had not been together before then. And I became interested in a real orphanage, a real school. You'll recall in the novel, there's a school that's for orphans, for male orphans, that's modeled on a military academy. And I met someone who had been there, who had gone to the school, and how the military would when they graduated from grade 12, they went into the military. They had been programmed from when they were children. And I got to thinking, partly because I had been in an orphanage, that I mean, I feel like an orphan to this day. And I thought there's a story in that where somebody from the CIA would go to an orphanage like that, where they're training them to be soldiers, and choose them to be like their foster father, so that they would become his private spies. And I just loved that idea. And it was new. The spy novel changed because of that novel. And people began paying more attention to the way spies really related. Now, I may anticipate a question here. How did I know about the spy things? And the answer is that when soldiers in very special units in the military in the United States, special forces, SEALs, Delta Force, and things like that, when they come out of the military, they often go to work for espionage agencies.
Yes.
But they do so through another company. So here's the CIA, here's another company. They work for that company, and that company works here, so that you have what's called deniability. So that if they were caught doing some things that they shouldn't have been doing in a foreign country, there's no way it could be blamed on the people who had actually hired them. And so where I'm going with this is that many fans of First Blood and Rambo were in that position. So they privately taught me what they had learned when they went to spy school, which is the nickname is the farm, and
Mm-hmm.
in Langley, Virginia.
Yes, in Langley.
So I had some unofficial training, and then I looked hard, and I was able to find some authentic books on this subject. But people who know about spies and read Brotherhood of the Rose, they say, yeah, he's using the correct what's called spycraft, tradecraft.
Oh, great. Quoting your own words, you became a real pro in
Well,
writing.
yes, and I did. I managed to. There was an unofficial course that was taught for people in the security business, and I was able to get accepted into that. So I had 3 weeks also of practical training about following people and eavesdropping, and it was very complicated, but very fascinating. And the basics don't really change. Yes, it's computers and it's satellites, but ultimately it's people on the ground doing, to use some slang from the spy world, dead drops and brush contacts and things of that sort.
Yes, uh, people don't know, but many of the wars nowadays, from years, from decades, they deployed of private contractors,
Yes.
as they say, to avoid saying mercenaries or soldiers of fortune. That's
Yes.
what they are really are. So, well, let's go with the first question from Emiliano. If you, oh, I got a question about, yes, Captain America.
Yes.
How do you deal with your own perspective as author or writer, and the mandatory or the regulatory things that are a big company like um, Marvel used to guide their superheroes stuff. So how do you deal with your own pace, your own approach, your own way of writing with these established standard? I think you have to observe.
An editor from Marvel phoned me one day and said that he had an idea that it would be interesting to have the creator of Rambo write about Captain America, two United States military icons. And
Yeah.
remember, I'm a Canadian. I was born in Canada. I am American citizen too, but there's this kind of split personality that I bring. It's very ironic that at that time a Canadian created an American icon. Um, and I liked that idea. I thought it would be very interesting. And when I was a child, one of the things I liked to do was go to comic book stores. Where I lived, they had a comic book store where people brought in comic books they had read and exchanged them for other comic books. And there was a fee, some money that you paid to be part of this so that you could change comic books back and forth. And every Thursday, I went there, and comic books fascinated me when I was young. So when he said to me, "Would you like to do this?" I thought, yeah, it'd be like going back to when I was young. And then I said, "But I don't know anything about writing comic books." And he said, "I'll send you some scripts." And I was amazed to discover how detailed they are and
Absolutely.
how much power the writer has. Because I could choose how many, they call them panels, the different images, they're called panels. And I could choose how many panels I wanted on a page. I could have one big image, or maybe two, like so, or four, or I could have eight, Well, you don't want any more than 8. The artist will go, the artist would be very angry trying to do little details. Oh, and you could do different shapes. You could do pages panels this way. I thought it was interesting. And each of those panels has to have a description of what happens in them. And if somebody talks, there has to be what they call a caption. And I thought, this is fascinating. It's like stop action storytelling. It's like one image jumps to the next, jumps to the next, jumps to the next. And it's almost like what's between the images is almost as important as what's on them. And I thought, in a way, it's a little bit like if working in the movie business, they have an expression called storyboards,
Indeed, indeed.
where a director will try to have each shot in the movie drawn. So, and then he can or she can, before they actually get on the set, they can decide how many cuts they want. So I thought this is a little bit like writing for a movie too. I embraced it. I thought it was fascinating. So I asked Marvel to send me all the important issues about Captain America, the establishment of his character, the things because some of the issues were independent adventures, but I wanted to know his legend. I wanted to know the myth behind him. And so they sent me, I got quite a lot of things. And I read all those and I thought, okay, how to do this a little differently. And my idea was that I would take a soldier, in a combat situation where he is trying to make things better for the country that he is in, where he's fighting, and that the story would show he would undergo so much hardship, but he kept getting stronger as he was encountering conflict. And the theme would be that all of us have within us the ability, the capacity to be Captain America or the equivalent hero. Different nations, I mean, Captain America is a very specific name, but different nations, different cultures all have the capacity to be a hero if we but look for it in ourselves, if we but try hard enough. So that was the theme of the story. And there wasn't a lot about Captain America's background, although I used some of it as he was telling my main character about his own experiences. And the idea was that this character I was inventing would become a version of Captain America. So it was the short answer is that Marvel sent me a lot of material, and they helped me educate myself so that I could write. And I then went on to write two long episodes for Spider-Man,
Yes.
and I did another one for Wolverine.
Yeah.
I
So
love
they didn't tie your hands.
No, they were very encouraging. There was at the start a concern about having, I had said it in Iraq, and they said they didn't want to have a contemporary combat zone because years later it might not feel the same. So I invented a country.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, but we all knew what it was. But I invented a country, and that's good because you have to, when you're writing, you should know, you should be aware that 10 years from now, and 20 years, and 30 years, if you're lucky and people are still reading you, that those books and stories won't feel like they are right now, that they actually change and move forward with the times. So I try in First Blood, for example, Vietnam is mentioned only maybe 5 times in the novel. And so that in a way you could read that now and it could feel right. It could feel current. It doesn't have that 1970s feel to it. So I'm a big believer in writing books that are not rooted in the time they were written in.
Great. Fernando, you want to see something? Say
Eh,
something?
con respecto a, paso a mi pregunta, con respecto a la novela El Tótem, The Totem, que es una novela de terror que David Morrell escribió hace un par de décadas atrás, y él contó la extraña experiencia de tener que cambiar prácticamente toda la novela porque la editorial se lo solicitaba, poniéndole más ritmo, poniéndole romance, poniéndole acción. El Totem es una novela que está traducida al español, así que invito a la gente a que la lea y también recomiendo leer las dos versiones, porque son muy diferentes. Mi pregunta es, ¿cómo le sirvió esa experiencia de tener que reescribir el tótem para sus siguientes novelas? Por ejemplo, en sus novelas, en sus nuevos thrillers, siempre arranca con escenas de acción para enganchar al espectador, al lector, perdón, desde la primera página. Bien, ¿cómo influenció esa experiencia en el tótem en sus siguientes novelas?
Yes. Let me see if I can translate this. um, as you shared in previous interviews, um, you have to rewrite your horror novel, The Totem, because of requirements of the publisher in order to add some kind of action, love, characters, stuff, and so on. So you rewrite the novel to the point that it's almost seemed like two different novels. And what have you taken from that experience for your subsequent novels? For example, many of your novels open with an action scene to immediately hook the reader. So, can you explain us what was the experience of writing even two different novels?
And I don't know if many authors have had this experience.
Yes, indeed.
So I love horror. I don't like the kind of horror where people jump out of, doorways and start stabbing people. I like mood. I like atmosphere, and the classics, Dracula and things like that, Frankenstein, the Portrait of Dorian Gray, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They tend to be largely atmospheric. It's the mood in them. And a lot of this too is because when I was a child, when I was young, I identified with horror movies. I very much liked them. So I wanted to see if I could write a new version of the werewolf story. And my idea was that there would be a virus similar to rabies that would affect. We have three brains. We have three levels of a brain, and
Yes, indeed.
the limbic brain is our primordial brain. It's our animal brain. And so what would happen if the virus destroyed all the aspects of the human brain except for the limbic brain? We would have a human being who was an animal. And I
Right.
thought that was fascinating. And I'm very interested in prehistoric cave drawings. And in Europe, I've been to many of the caves, and they have figures, totemic figures of that look like werewolves, that have they're very eerie. And I thought, okay, I'm going to write. In a way, it's a psychological story. It's about what happens when human beings, when their capacity to reason is diminished. So I wrote a 500-page novel that I submitted to my publisher. Well, the problem was that I had written First Blood, which what we'll call outdoor action. All right, to make it very general. Then I'd written a book called Testament, which is outdoor action, but it gives people nightmares. It's a very strong action book, very strong. Then I wrote a Western called Last Reveille. My agent's looking at me and saying, "What are you doing? You know, where are you?" And my publisher is saying that. And then I give them a 500-page horror novel. So, I mean, what a strange start to a career.
Yeah.
These days, no one would allow you to do that. But I got away with it. And I was able to look at different genres. And I love horror. So my poor editor is looking at this 500. He wants another First Blood. And what he got was a 500-page horror novel. And he said, no, I can't do this. And so he said, and I didn't have, First Blood had not yet been a movie. So I did not have authority. I did not have power. So he said, I want this shorter by at least a half. And I want it, you know, and I want some romance in it. And I wasn't making very much money, earning very much money as a teacher. And my books, I had the movie sale for First Blood, which had not yet appeared as a movie. But I didn't, I had a family, and I thought, well, okay, I'll do this. And I thought, but, you know, I do things for, you know, it's for fun. You want to see how you can. So I thought, what if, very few people know this, what if I wrote the new version of the totem, the reduced version with a little romance in it? What if I wrote it in unrhymed meter? So the book is written in what's called anapests. Slaughter stepped inside the bar and tried to keep from looking nervous. It was 10 o'clock at night. The whole book.
Incredible.
But except for the scary parts. If something scary happened, I broke the rhythm. Because the reader would be so used to the rhythm, when I broke it, I hoped that I'd get a jolt, that the reader would, you know, would jump because the rhythm was broken. So
it's like getting a bump in the street.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And so, I mean, who does this, right? But that's the way I think. And it's a perfectly fine horror novel. It's different, but it's okay. I mean, and in fact, there was a book in English called Horror 100 Best Books.
Yes.
Yes.
And that book was listed as one of the 100 best books. It's very intense. It's almost like a haiku of a horror novel. It's so compressed, and I'm very proud of it. But so time marches on, and there was a specialty publisher named Donald Grant. And Donald Grant had published a lot of Stephen King special editions. And in fact, because of the totem, Stephen King and I became good friends. He got in touch with me one day and said, hey, I read the totem. I think this is really cool. Why don't we get together? So he came out to visit me while I was teaching at the University of Iowa. And I went to visit him in Maine. And I stayed in his house. And we spent a week together. Wonderful man, very, very smart, very gifted, very, you know, just a really good person. You'd like being with him. So I've met this man, Donald Grant, who's publishing Stephen King special editions, beautiful with illustrations and all. And Don said to me, maybe we should do a version of the totem that way with painting with art and all. And I said, well, if we're going to do that, why there was an original version before this one. It was 500 pages and it's very different. It's a different style, different beginning, different end. The middle is largely the same. And I said, why don't you do that one? So he said, yes, it'll be different. So now I had the 1979 version, which was the rewrite, and then I had the original version coming out, I think, in 1994. And when I released the ebook of the totem, I put both versions. It has the short version and the long version. So when people buy the ebook, they get a they get more than they thought they would get for the money because they're getting two books with the same plot but entirely different way of telling the story.
Amazing. Back in times, the when Sigmund Freud talked about the third levels of the brain, he
Yes.
called the basement the reptilian.
Yes, exactly so. The limbic brain and the reptilian brain. That's correct.
Nothing related to the reptilian, so-called reptilian race of aliens. No, reptilian,
It's
because
about
it's the first animal that goes out of the water in the very beginning of the time. But yes, it's a great plot of a novel.
If I can add to that, because I'm very interested in Jung. We're the great psychologist, so we have
Yes,
Sigmund Freud, we
carry
have
on.
Carl Jung. Okay, so I'm more interested in Jung than I am in Freud. And there's a wonderful book by Joseph Campbell called The Hero with a Thousand Faces.
Yes, indeed.
He looks at all the various stories in the world and how they have folk stories, origin stories for countries, and how they have similar characters, they have similar situations. And I'm fascinated by, I don't think it's possible to write a bad story about a bridge, about a river, about a cave, about a forest, about a mountain. And you'll note these things are just all through my books, that there's something about going to those situations. It's as if they are symbols of the way our minds are constructed. And they go back to a period in our evolution when human beings were becoming human beings, and that we retain certain memories of what it was like to be animals. Some religious people deny, of course, that evolution is a fact, but I'm persuaded. And so I was using Jung as much as I was using Freud in all of this. And you can see it's my professor background that I try to find there's got to be a depth to it, a kind of lower layer in the stories. And then if somebody reads a book a second time, that lower layer rises to the surface and they almost become different books. But anyway, that's the story on the totem. I'm very fond of it.
Yes, me too. As a horror writer, I have to say, me too. Who next, guys?
Emiliano.
Sí. Bien, en relación a su forma de desarrollar la acción, ya sea relatarla o contextualizarla, ¿considera usted que las formas de escribir en estos géneros, hablo de acción, terror, thrillers, bueno, espías, ¿considera usted que las formas de escribir en estos géneros puede haber cambiado, pensando en cómo las manifestaciones de violencia hoy son bastante diferentes a las que había o las que se daban en la década de 60 y 70?
Yes. Oh, well, the question of Emiliano is kind of a sociological question, because he said that regarding your approach to developing action, do you believe that the ways of writing in these genres, horror, action, war, etc., may have changed considering how nowadays violence is exteriorized, is manifest, and is pretty, excuse me?
Depicted. Violence is depicted
Yes.
today.
Yes. So today, nowadays are pretty different that what this subject was shown in the 60s and the 70s.
Mhm.
I'm a fan of a movie called The Wild Bunch.
Yes.
It's by Sam Peckinpah. It's a
Yeah.
West. And that movie came out in 1969 when I was writing First Blood. And what Sam Peckinpah did in that movie was to create a new kind of Western, which had a degree of realism in the action and a kind of non-romantic way of approaching the characters. It was new. To this day, at least in the United States, if someone wants to make a Western, they have to decide if it's going to be like The Wild Bunch or not like The Wild Bunch. I mean, that's an important movie. It's few movies have, there was this and then there was that, and The Wild Bunch is in the middle. And I wanted, when people write action, and they're still doing it now, a shot rang out is a familiar expression in English action movies. Shots do not ring out. There's no ringing at all, except maybe in your ears afterward. And there's so much bad cliched writing about action. And so when I was writing First Blood and I saw The Wild Bunch, and also my master's degree was on Ernest Hemingway and on his style. And Ernest made a point of trying to find fresh ways to describe something, clear, fresh, specific, vivid ways. Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought, is there a way to do that in an action book? So First Blood was my version of The Wild Bunch. Now, I'm not a big believer in overwhelming violence, describing it. One or two details is sufficient, but we have to create the feeling of it, the reality of it at the same time. So when I was writing First Blood, I wanted to try to be, I learned about firearms. I went to a school that taught me about firearms. There's a lot of outdoor experiences in it. I went to hunters. I was in Pennsylvania at the time in the central, it's a mountainous area. And I found some people who are hunters who let me go with them when they went into the mountains so that I could observe and get the details and make my details accurate so that I wasn't dealing in a lot of cliches. So my experience has always been to try to learn about what I was writing and then to write about it in a way that would be effective without being repugnant. And I'll say I wrote a book called The Shimmer, which has a lot of airplane things in it, a lot of airplane sequences. And I knew to write about it believably, I should have some pilot training. And eventually I acquired my pilot's license so that I could write about it. So I really believe in the research, but to get to the core of the question, it's a fine line between action which is vivid and action which is repugnant. And I don't think First Blood's a very strong book. But at a certain point, I did hold back. I was, my goal is, can I make the story effective without upstaging it?
Yes. Right, right. Who's next, guys?
Emiliano.
Yes.
Okay, this is my last question. En su introducción a la colección de relatos Black Evening, usted menciona la influencia de William Tenn en sus comienzos. Si bien su influencia se entiende como más pedagógica, ¿perdura dicha influencia en su escritura actual y nunca le interesó la ciencia ficción a la hora de escribir? Ese es el libro.
All right. Amy said that in your introduction of the series The Black Evening, you mentioned the influence of William Tenn in your early career. Does that influence persist in your current writing? Have you ever been interested in science fiction when writing?
I'm so glad we're mentioning William Tenn. And his real name was Philip Klass, Klass. And he had been and still was a science fiction writer. And he'd been very famous in the 50s for inventing the comic, the amusing science fiction story, one that made us laugh a little. And he had decided that being a professional writer there were ups and downs in his earning money, and he became a professor at the Pennsylvania State University, and he agreed to help me. I don't know, I must have been very insistent, or I must have looked very hungry or something, but he said, all right, I will help you. And he talked to me a lot about writing, and he would go through my manuscripts. And writing, all writing is based on the same principles. And so while he was a science fiction writer and I was starting as an action writer, it didn't matter. And to this day, as I'm writing, I can hear him over my shoulder saying, "Is that clear? Is that really what you want to say?" I mean, he was such an important influence on me and so generous. And to go back to something I said earlier, I'm an orphan. So I did not have a father, and my stepfather and I did not get along. My career became what it is because of people like Philip Klass, William Tenn, who agreed to help me. They became, as it were, my father.
Yes, like a mentor.
Yes, and in a very powerful way. There was a Hemingway scholar named another Philip Young, who was very helpful to me and taught me a lot about writing in a different way, about academic writing. And there was a screenwriter named Stirling Silliphant. Stirling is an Oscar recipient for In the Heat of the Night, adapting John Ball's novel. He wrote The Towering Inferno. He wrote The Poseidon Adventure, a very successful screenwriter. And I fell in love with a television series he had written called Route 66, about two young men in a sports car trying to find themselves as they drove across the United States. And he and I became very close. So those men, Philip Klass, Philip Young, Stirling Silliphant, I am speaking to you now because I'm very emotional about this. I would not be here if not for them. And I pay it back. I help a lot of people. I help a lot of writers try to find their own voice and hoping maybe they will do the same to other writers. I mean, being a mentor is it's a spiritual thing. It's one of the most, I think, important, constructive things we can do. So anyway, I'm glad that we have a chance to talk about it. I did write, to answer the question, I did write a few science fiction stories. I did one about cryogenics.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, and I guess we could say The Shimmer has elements of science fiction because it's mysterious balls of light,
Yes.
which are based upon the real balls of light in Texas. So occasionally I will go into science fiction territory, but when I teach writing, I say if you're going to work in the genre, learn the history. Make sure you know all the great books and how it's leading up to you so that you don't invent something that was invented 50 years ago and you look old-fashioned. The idea is to know your history and then build upon it. So I don't know science fiction well enough to except for occasionally to work in that field. I know a lot more about horror and I know a lot more about action. And I could lecture on both topics, but I could not lecture about science fiction.
Okay.
All right. Next question, guys.
My last question es sobre su última novela, The Shimmer, que justamente la acaba de mencionar. The Shimmer es una novela muy compleja porque es un thriller sobre unas luces misteriosas, pero el lector lo va leyendo sin saber si la novela es sobrenatural, si es de terror, si es ciencia ficción, si es sobre espías. El género no queda del todo claro hasta por lo menos el final, que no lo vamos a revelar y que es también de todas maneras un poco ambiguo. ¿Tuvo algún problema al publicarla, al no estar tan encuadrada dentro de un género en concreto?
Well, the last question of Fernando is about your last novel, The Shimmer, that have many ways of approaching. You can, in a moment, you think is a spy thing, in another is an action, in another is a horror, in another, and so on. So the question is, do you have any trouble because we just you get a knowledge of the kind of novel that it is, so on, at the end, because do you have any troubles to be accepted by the publisher, this kind of mixture of many genres going there in a pace that are going up and down and to the side and to the other and trying to I don't know if it's on purpose to disguise the absolutely plot that what really is going on inside the whole novel till the end.
In the United States, at least, in recent years, there's an expression called branding yourself,
Yes.
which refers to you become identified with a certain kind of book, let's say horror, and you stay with that for your career. My observation of authors who have stayed with one book for their career is that after 20 years, which is a long time, but my career has lasted 50 years, and it is a long time, that the author, if they stay doing the same thing, they get tired of it about the same time that readers get tired of it. And I know many authors who say, boy, I wish I could write this kind of book, but my publisher won't let me. When I began in the 1970s, people didn't think this way. So I mentioned earlier, I wrote 2 action books, First Blood Testament. I wrote a Western, Last Reveille, wrote a horror novel, and then I moved into espionage. What's wrong with me? Well, I think my mind, it gets bored easily. I think that I have that, oh, this looks interesting. I'd like to work on that. And then next year I say, oh, that looks interesting. I'd like to do that. And I was allowed to do it. It became almost, one author said to me somewhat angrily, he said, damn it, you've reinvented yourself again. And what would happen though is readers are loyal to a kind of fiction, not necessarily to the author. So if the author switches to a different kind of fiction, readers may not follow that author. So what was happening to me was fans of First Blood wouldn't be fans of The Totem.
Yeah.
So I would gain readers as I was losing readers. And then when I moved into espionage with Brotherhood of the Rose, I was gaining people who were interested in espionage, but I was losing the horror people. So my readership tended to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I sold more books, they might go up. I might have more, but if I switched to a different genre, I'd lose them, but I'd gain others. And this is how unpredictable I am. My last three books, my previous three books were Victorian historical mystery thrillers, which have a vague horror feel to them. And I loved writing those. The research on those was wonderful. And again, to say something we were discussing earlier, the atmosphere, the fog, which was really smoke of London at that time. And I've had a wonderful career being able to do what I wanted. And I'm not sure that anybody will be able to repeat that pattern for future authors. I think more and more they're saying, no, this is what you are and this is what you will stay with. So I feel very blessed that I had the chance to experiment as much as I did, and also to learn so much. You know, if I was going to write a kind of book, I'd learn, like with horror, I learned I could lecture about that. I could give you a 1-hour lecture about horror. It's been a thrill for me to be able to be so various, but today I would not be allowed to do it.
Well, I have my last question that is have two part. One is for all our guests that what are you up to right now? If you are writing something or you are doing anything about writing. But previously, I would like to ask you, because you mentioned a lot that the time of you prepare yourself to get deep into the theme that you are about to write. Umberto Eco used to say that it takes about 3, 5, or even 8 years to write one of their novels, because he spent at least 2 years or 3 reading, finding books, going to places, etc. So, for instance, if I'm reading an action movie or whatever, an action book, or even a horror book that is talking about fire guns, and it never mentioned the recoil of the. I said, you never ever fire a shotgun. So
Yes.
that's the thing that
Yes.
it's not important, but it's just part of fire a shotgun. You feel the recoil much
Yes.
more if you have a long gun. So first, I would like to be answering this question: how long it takes to you to a new to write a new novel, and the second one is, where is your restless imagination going right now?
Well, to answer the first one, I pay attention when if something interests me, I like something new, and I say that's interesting. Then I ask myself, why does it interest me? And I toss this around in my head. The example I give is there is a book in English called a magazine in English called Architectural Digest,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about famous homes and how they were built and who owned them and things like that. And I was in a store once and I picked it up and I looked, and there was an article about a silent movie actor named Ramon Navarro.
Mm-hmm.
And he had asked the son of Frank Lloyd Wright to design a home for him in the Hollywood Hills at a time when there was no there were no trees, it was desert because Los Angeles is a desert.
Yeah.
And there were photos of him, there were photos of the house, and I was spellbound. But it wasn't because of Ramon Navarro. I mean, it was the house, it was something. And I spent a long time thinking about photographs and what they meant to me and why I was fascinated by these. And I finally realized that I associated photographs with death because they freeze time. And when we look at a photo, we say, well, look at how she looked 20 years ago, how young she looked. Or oh, God bless him, he's dead now. And oh, the tree was so little then. Look at how big the tree is now. They freeze time. So I wanted to write a book. It's called Double Image, about a photographer and incorporate this feeling of photography and death. It's very complicated. And that prompted me to write an essay to myself to say, why are these photographs bothering you so much? Why are they obsessing you so much? And that essay went to 20 single lined pages. And I knew that I knew the novel would have to be about a photographer. So now I don't know anything about photography. So now I have to take a course in photography. Now I have to interview photographers. Now I have to go to fine art photography stores and have them tell me why this is a better photograph than that and how it was created. So the research, it's always the research. I'm like, I don't know if method acting is an expression
Yeah.
you absorb yourself into the character. So for me, I absorb myself into the kind of book I'm going to write and do a lot of research. And the more I learn, the more I know I can put in. And it's not been in books before. It'll be all brand new. It'll be very fresh. And so I write this conversation with myself, this essay, and then I expand it. And then, I try this approach and that approach. And I mean, it's all about preparation. And I have met authors who do not do research. And I do not understand this because there's so much opportunity. How many people writing novels about the legal system, about courtrooms, have ever been to a courtroom?
Mm-hmm.
Or do they watch movies?
Mm-hmm.
How many people, as you said, writing about firearms, how often have they shot firearms? I have shot a lot of firearms, and to add to you, I hate shotguns. They mess my shoulder up so bad that I never 2 weeks to get over it. I don't want nothing to do with shotguns. I'm very good with pistols. And with long rifles, but not as much as the pistols. But I know what I'm talking about, and I am friends with people who do know about firearms, and I ask questions, and you can't, and yeah, and the smell. There's a smell to gunpowder when it ignites. There's a there's this, and people, you keep both eyes open when you aim, but sometimes people, you see authors saying, well, he closed his left eye, and no, you keep both eyes open. So there's no substitute for doing the research, because you get the best material, you get reality that you can put into your story. So it takes that long. And then the other story, I was sidetracked. I wanted to write another Western. And I wanted to write a big Western like Lonesome Dove, like Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. And I could not make it work. It got bigger, but it didn't get what I want. It just became more of the same. And so I lost a year or two on that. And so I've been doing some other things in the meantime. I'm writing some short stories. I can't talk about them now, but there's a possibility of a television series for one of my books, and then I'd be working on. And also, there's a new book called The Rambo Report by an author named Ned Segaloff, Nat Segaloff, excuse me, and it's called The Rambo Report: 5 films, 3 books. I wrote 3 books about Rambo, 1 legend, and I worked with him on that. He's the author, but I read all the drafts in order to get the facts. It's about how the movies were made and how the character became what it is. And I wanted to make sure the history was right. So that took a long time. And then I wrote a foreword to it. So I've been doing some things that might not be visible, but that are showing, that are sort of hidden in books like the Rambo Report. So, but at the moment there are a couple of movie things and maybe TV series but I can't talk about them because if they don't happen, then I have to say, well, and then it gets embarrassing. So I don't.
Yes, of course, we understand. So that's it. We really made it, and we have no words to thank you. Your open heart, your answers was at me myself, Fernando, and the other guys. We are professors at the university, so we it's a pleasure to talk with allow me to call you a colleague, that because your way of storytelling is the way of a professor trying to present to the class what is about the thing and the whole process behind and before, and the outcome of that is this. So your answer was very enlightened and at open heart. It was a real masterclass of writing, and you let the people, our audience, go inside not only your restless brain, but your kind heart, because you were very, very, very generous. Open your we say the kitchen of your sorcery. So
thank you. And I'll say the reverse. I don't often have a chance to speak to academics, to professors who are experts in who know how to look at books and how how they're put together and how to analyze them. And when I taught, I had 1-hour classes, but I did not use notes, and I lectured. It was not question and answer. I knew what I wanted to say, and I had some theater background. So I came in and I lectured for an hour. So, and I love teaching. I love providing information. So, and I sensed that we were doing the same thing that you felt.
Yes, it was very noticeable because you really did it. Really did it. So, your closing words, Fernando, for our
Yes.
great guest.
Solamente muchísimas gracias por el tiempo dado. Tenemos la suerte de tener varias novelas de David Morrell en español, así que somos afortunados de haberlo tenido acá. Realmente a pleasure to having you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fernando
Thank
said
you.
that
Thank you very much.
we have the pleasure of having your many of your books translated to Spanish. So having you here and sharing your time generously as you did is for us a double honor and of course a great occasion, great deal of pleasure. So thank you very much indeed.
You.
We are in debt with you because we learn a lot, and I'm sure our audience really appreciate your master class about writing many genres in this melting pot that is
Yes.
if
Yes.
I may call your gifted brain.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so long. Thank you once again. It was a really pleasure.
I
Bye bye.
enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.